Hey, welcome to this charming list with your host, Alyssa. How is everybody? I'm doing pretty damn well over here. Just trying to get my kids healthy, vaccinated. So please click like, click subscribe. Just do it real quick for me. I'd like to hit my minimum for subscribers in order to get sponsors. I would like to include and support local businesses, women-owned businesses, and people of color-owned businesses, okay? Please help me out with that. Thank you so much. And find me on Spotify, YouTube, and Instagram as this charming lists. I have given myself the nickname feminazi, and it's meant to subvert a term that people still use today. I heard it growing up, and the term feminist still comes with a stigma. Our society is rampant with anti-Semitism. I'd like to point out that I'm Jewish on both sides of my ancestry, and I just did an episode about World War II. Check it out, please, about Nazis escaping. It was pretty intense. And, very few people today are one thing or the other. We're all mixed, despite what ancestry tells you or doesn't tell you. I mean, very few people have 100% of anything, which I wish these Nazis knew back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, etc., and all throughout history, right? It's science, man. We can look around the world today, see the same patterns and the same hatred. We're all human. We all feel pain. We're all subjugates to the same biological forces. And, we all have our own tastes. This goes for sexuality too, of course. What we do with our bodies is our own damn business as adults. And I'm leading you, kind listeners, towards the topic of today because all of those who were accused in this case were lesbians. Maybe it was because it was the 90s and the term sounds like you're a leper or something. It's a weird, ugly word, right? Lesbians. Sounds unappetizing, right? Maybe that's why so many lesbians of that time took on the term dyke. Like, hey, all the dykes are going to the bar, It just sounds tougher and cooler, right? I mean, in today's culture, I actually love the terms that the kids are using today, right? Fluid, pansexual, bi-curious, tri-curious, plain old sexual beings. Am I right? What term do you identify with? And let me know in the comments if you'd be so kind. Disclaimer. This is the internet. These facts are concurrently also from the internet and other random printed sources. Please take them with a grain of kosher salt, or in other words, this podcast assumes no responsibility or liability for any errors or omissions in the content of this episode. Viewer discretion is advised. Today we are going to focus on the case of the San Antonio Four. This case really hits home to me hardcore because I lived in San Antonio for 4 years. Granted, I lived there after the Austin and Hill Country boom, where hordes of people from all over the U.S. started moving to the area. It's beautiful there, right? I mean, the Hill Country has wineries and quaint little Texas towns, mostly with German heritage. Austin is now known, of course, for huge music festivals like ACL and South by Southwest, as well as general keep Austin weird type vibes. It's gone through a lot over the years, and it's a fun place to be. San Antonio sort of received this spillover because it has really affordable large properties and beautiful places for the community to gather, like the Riverwalk and the Pearl, both of which I recommend. Go take a boat ride, have a margarita. The spot with the multicolor umbrellas right on the water. That's my jam. But back in the 1990s, however, it was mostly generational locals who grew up there in tight-knit communities. The west side of San Antonio is a working-class area primarily populated with Hispanic families. Traditional religious values, in this case Catholic, reigned supreme. Now, Satanic Panic had been a thing since the 1980s, and it was just starting to die down in the mid-90s. The Satanic Panic concept is a moral panic consisting of over 12,000 unsubstantiated cases of satanic ritual abuse starting in the United States in the 1980s, spreading throughout many parts of the world by the late 1990s, and persisting today. 12,000 cases is insane. And yes, it does persist today, even though it hasn't been in the headlines since the 90s. While I was researching Satanic Panic, or SRA, sometimes known as ritual abuse, ritualistic abuse, organized abuse, or sadistic ritual abuse, headlines popped up about it relating to the Travis Scott Astroworld concert earlier this month. That surprised me, right? Apparently, TikTok and QAnon are blowing up with new conspiracy theories. I haven't looked into it much, but feel free to leave some comments if you know anything about that, please. Satanic Panic originated in 1980 with the publication of Michelle Remembers, a book co-written by Canadian psychiatrist Lawrence Pazder and his patient and future wife, Michelle Smith, which used the discredited practice of recovered memory therapy to make sweeping lurid claims about satanic ritual abuse involving Smith. The allegations, which afterwards arose throughout much of the U.S., involved reports of physical and sexual abuse of people in the context of occult or satanic rituals. In its most extreme form, allegations involve a conspiracy of global satanic cults that includes the wealthy and powerful world, the elite, which sacrifices humans or animals, creates pornography, and elicits prostitution. So this psychiatrist writes a book about his patient and then marries her. That's sketchy AF right there. I mean, testimonials, symptomless rumors, and techniques to investigate or uncover memories of SRA were disseminated through professional, popular, and religious conferences, as well as through talk shows, sustaining and further spreading the moral panic throughout the US and beyond. I would love to play some clips right now from Sally Jessy, Geraldo, maybe even Jerry Springer, but copyright. Nah, not gonna deal with that. Some people still believe there is credence to allegations of SRA and continue to discuss the topic. Publications by Kathy O'Brien claiming SRA were the result of government programs, specifically the CIA's Project MKUltra, which I did an episode about, go check it out, wink, 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 to produce Manchurian Candidate-style mind control in young children, were picked up by conspiracy theorists, linking belief in SRA with claims of government conspiracies. In the book, Mistakes Were Made, But Not By Me, it's a cute title, authors Carol Tavris and Elliot Aronson cite ongoing belief in the SRA phenomenon despite a complete lack of evidence as demonstration of the confirmation bias in believers. It further points out that a lack of evidence is actually considered by believers in SRA as more evidence, demonstrating, quote, how clever and evil the cult leaders were. They were eating those babies, bones and all, unquote. A Salt Lake City therapist, Barbara Snow, was put on probation in 2008 for planting false memories of satanic abuse in patients. And that was 2008. In some cases, allegations resulted in criminal trials with varying results. After 7 years in court, the McMartin trial resulted in no convictions for any of the accused, while other cases result in lengthy sentences, including the West Memphis 3, which I'm working on right now. I'm telling you about that right now, so just keep that in mind. Some of which were later reversed. So this leads us to the four friends at the center of our story today. Elizabeth Ramirez, Cassandra Rivera, Christy Mayhew, and Anna Vasquez are four friends who relied on one another to get through the struggles of everyday life. Sometimes they were even roommates. Anna Vasquez remembers being at a bar in San Antonio's neighborhood in the 90s and watching a young man stumble into the front door with a knife in his back. With gay bashing being commonplace, it wasn't safe to be out in most places. In this climate, after seeing how the gay kids at school were treated, Vasquez decided to stay in the closet until after high school. Vasquez came out as gay after graduating in 1993 and began attending a local college, but after a few classes, financial aid fell through. She dropped out and began working at Little Caesars Pizza to save up for more classes. Cassie met her one night when she went to pick up pizza. Both later described it as love at first sight. Though Anna's family was more accepting than the others, she still remembers gawking looks whenever she and Cassie would stroll together at carnivals. Eventually, the two would move in together, and Anna would treat Cassie's two kids as her own. Quote, "We were inseparable," Cassie said. Anna applied, quote, unquote, excuse me. Anna applied to nursing school. Cassie, who worked at an AutoZone and frequented car shows, thought about becoming a mechanic. Christy wanted to return to veterinarian school at Texas A&M if she could find the money. Ana Vasquez had played sports with Elizabeth Ramirez in high school. On trips around the city for volleyball games, Ana would bring along a radio and they'd belt out Friends in Low Places by Garth Brooks. Let's back up a bit and look at this so-called ringleader of this group of four, Liz Ramirez. Her sister Rosemary and her sister's husband, Javier Limon, will play into this story. After Liz turned 16, she began to stay out later, experiment with drugs, date boys, and fight with her mother, Gloria. One night, Elizabeth stole some of her mother's prescription anxiety pills, who hasn't, and overdosed. Gloria took her to the hospital and then kicked her out of the house. Elizabeth moved in with her sister, Rosemary, who was then living with Javier Limon and their 3 young children. But Elizabeth soon found problems there as well. Limon was overbearing and lectured her constantly. He had also been making advances toward her, she said. He would offer Elizabeth rides, he would give her small amounts of cash when she needed it, and he would leave long messages on her answering machine, back when people had answering machines. Recently, he had been sending her love letters. The letters refer to Elizabeth as my little angel and include bits of poetry. They ask her to keep secrets and instruct her to call at specific times, like between 7 and 7:15 a.m. or 5:45 and 6 p.m. Quote, "I hope these letters are not upsetting, disturbing, or making you feel uncomfortable," unquote, one reads. They are signed Javier Limon. She rejected his advances, left her sister's home, and moved in with a girlfriend from school. The two girls grew closer, and Elizabeth, beginning to realize she was attracted to women, eventually started dating. Elizabeth knew that being a lesbian would make her an outsider in her conservative Catholic family. The relationship could remain secret only so long, and when Elizabeth's mother found out, their already strained connection suffered further. Quote, "I don't want to say I was disowned, but I was," unquote, Liz said. Though her attraction to women made her an outsider at home, it led her to new friendships. While working at H-E-B, the grocery store in Texas, she got to know Christy Mayhew, who was born in Montana and moved to San Antonio at age 3 when her father was transferred to the Randolph Air Force Base. Christy's parents were divorced, and her mother, like Elizabeth's, was uncomfortable with her daughter's sexual orientation. Elizabeth and Christy moved in together as friends. At H-E-B, they met Cassie Rivera, who before coming to terms with her attraction to other women, had a son and a daughter and then split with their father. Cassie's mother had kicked her out of the house, so Cassie stayed sometimes at Elizabeth and Christy's apartment. Now, I'm not sure of the timeline as to when Cassie met her longtime partner Anna and when she met Liz and Christy at the H-E-B grocery store. I've read conflicting stories, so let's just say for our purposes here, that they were all a group of friends. They were really tight. Elizabeth still wasn't sure what she wanted to do, and she struggled with her new identity. After splitting with her first girlfriend, Elizabeth started dating a man named Hector. He liked to party, and her workaholic lifestyle drove them apart, but not before she became pregnant with his son. Though she hadn't prepared to become a young single mother, she knew she could rely on her 3 close friends for help. Liz says that after she became pregnant, Javier, her brother-in-law, who had by then separated from her sister, offered to marry her and was upset when she refused. A year after Javier and Rosemary split for good, he took a bus to Denver, where Rosemary was living, and returned to Texas with his kids. Rosemary, who had trouble fighting for custody since she lived outside of Texas, floated around, at one point moving to Mexico with a husband who had immigration issues. Javier says she went to Mexico to evade paying child support. She says she didn't pay because he wouldn't let her see the kids. Rosemary recounted years later that Javier threatened her family. Quote, "He knew what was going to hurt me the most," she said. "He had already taken my kids, so he couldn't hurt me there. What was next? My sister," unquote. Javier's kids took a liking to Elizabeth, so he'd let them stay at her apartment, even after he split up with Rosemary. Shortly after his daughters stayed at Elizabeth's apartment, during the time that will become the focus of the entire case, which we'll get to, Javier called her and said he had something important to tell her. Then he put her on hold to take another call, and he never came back, and that was the last time they spoke. Liz was 4 months pregnant when she heard a knock at her door. She had just gotten home from a shift at Arby's, where she had recently been promoted to manager. The man standing outside her small apartment had thick black hair. He introduced himself as Detective Thomas Majeka from the San Antonio Police Department, and though he was not in uniform, he said he was with the homicide unit. Elizabeth was confused. Had someone died? Majeka was helping investigate a sex crime and asked if she would come to the station to answer a few questions. Elizabeth, who had recently turned 20, climbed into his unmarked police car. Wow, that's sketchy. At the station, Majeka asked if she knew a man named Javier Limon and his 2 daughters. Of course she did. Limon was her sister's ex-boyfriend, and the 2 daughters were her 7 and 9-year-old nieces. She saw them often. About a month before, they had spent a week at her apartment. She was taken to the station to be questioned, and little did she know that they were being set up for something else altogether, and thus their nightmare began. She couldn't believe it at first. She was even convinced in her heart that nothing could happen. That's according to her. After all, they had no evidence. But there she was in Bexar County Jail, leaving her life and her baby behind. Her attorney did not help either. What she didn't realize at the time was that it was a military civil attorney who took her case. Quote, "I didn't even stand a chance because he had never tried a high-profile case like mine," unquote, Ramirez shares. According to a testimony against them, 20-year-old Liz Ramirez, 21-year-old Christy Mayhew, 19-year-old Cassandra Rivera, and 19-year-old Ana Vasquez spent the week of July 24th to the 31st, 1994, in an orgy of molestation. And not just that they molested them, but gang raped them as part of a devil-worshipping sex ritual. The women felt so confident in their innocence, they didn't even ask for lawyers during the interrogations. They thought telling the truth would save them. The nieces said the women were topless while they held them down and inserted various objects, such as tampons coated with gel, into them. They said that the women threatened them with a gun and a knife. The older child said that Aunt Liz ordered her to take a shower. From the bathroom, she heard screams from her younger sister. She tried to get out, but the door was locked. Elizabeth's lawyer, Freddie Ruiz, tried to get the older child to say that she was mixed up and that the gun had actually been wielded by her father, Javier, in Colorado. As a child, he explained, according to the trial transcript, the older daughter in question had offered a confabulation of facts and a jumbling of things, weapons, bedrooms, and hatred towards the family. He theorized that Javier had held a gun to her mother Rosemary's head years before in Denver, and that this had been refracted in the child's mind to include Aunt Elizabeth. Before charges were even filed, police learned that all 4 women were gay and had recently come out to their families. Vasquez and Rivera were dating at the time of the allegations. Many questions during the trial were related to the sexuality of all 4 defendants. All 4 women cooperated with authorities and vehemently denied that they molested the girls. Mayhew, Ramirez, Vasquez, and Rivera rejected prosecution offers to plead guilty for reduced sentences and went to trial. Ramirez, who was considered the ringleader, went to trial by herself in Bexar County Criminal District Court in February 1997. The older girl testified that the 4 women repeatedly molested them. The younger girl was not called to testify. Dr. Nancy Kellogg, a professor of pediatrics at the University of Texas Health Science Center in San Antonio, testified that she examined the girls and saw evidence of a healed scar on the older girl's hymen. Kellogg testified this scar was physical evidence of sexual molestation. In her notes, Kellogg speculated that the acts were, quote-unquote, satanic related. Although Kellogg admitted on cross-examination that she could not tell how old the scar was or whether it was the result of an accident, Kellogg insisted the scar indicated sexual abuse. On February 6, 1997, the jury convicted Ramirez of aggravated assault of a child and indecency with a child. She was sentenced to 37.5 years in prison. 1 year later, in February 1998, Mayhew, Vasquez, and Rivera, were tried together in Bexar County Criminal District Court. In this trial, both girls testified they were sexually molested, and Kellogg again testified about the physical evidence of abuse. The women denied the allegations and told the jury that they spent the week doing routine, mundane things such as shopping, going to Arby's for lunch. They testified they were never all there at the same time. At the second trial, there was far less talk of lesbianism. It was mentioned mostly by the defense attorneys who attempted to show that relationships between women have nothing to do with pedophilia. Cassie remembers her lawyer telling the women that they would surely win and coaching them not to jump up and down when the jury announced an acquittal. On Valentine's Day, 1998, a Saturday morning, all three women were convicted of the same crimes as Elizabeth: aggravated sexual assault of a child and indecency with a child. They were each sentenced to 15 years. As their family paid lawyers to file appeals, Cassie and Anna, still very much in love, set out together to investigate the case on their own. Cassie and Anna tried to meticulously recreate what happened the week of the alleged crimes. They scribbled the events of the week, as the women remember, on a large white poster board in a grid organized by the women and by day. It is a portrait of the mundane logistics of low-wage life. Elizabeth had just learned of her pregnancy and was recovering from a car accident. They traded cars so each could get to work, bought hot dogs for the kids, and played basketball at the park. Shifts at Arby's, shifts at AutoZone, swimming with the kids. Christy, still unemployed, pawned a radio. They took the girls to Walmart where they bought a fish. The next day the fish died and they returned it. Their reinvestigation wasn't fruitful. There is a home video from the period shortly before Christy, Cassie, and Anna went to prison in 2000. The video cuts between scenes of each of them spinning Cassie's kids on a small playground carousel and swimming at a beach. Cassie and Anna are looking for Elizabeth's old apartment. A wiry, bearded man appears on camera and tells them the building was torn down. The scene of the crime had vanished. The three women were reported to prison, where they were all given higher security levels, including at one point more than 30 days in solitary confinement for Cassie because they refused to take sex offender rehabilitation classes. The families did their best to move on. All four of the women describe a transition in prison from rage and bewilderment to acceptance and quiet resolve. Quote, "I tried writing the Innocence Projects and Oprah and Maury Povich and Montel," Anna said. "Anybody who would listen. I never heard anything back," unquote. More than a decade later, in 2011, Cassie was transferred to the hobby unit in Marlin, where Anna and Elizabeth had been living. Cassie saw Elizabeth for the first time at a Catholic mass. Around the same time, Anna was put on maintenance duty and assigned to fix the lights in Cassie's cell when the two former lovers saw each other. Quote, "We were both just shaking," quote unquote, Cassie remembers. Letters to various Innocence Projects weren't helping, but Daryl Otto, a Canadian data scientist, stumbled upon the case. He did research, corresponded with the women, and was confounded since the case didn't fit with any known patterns of female sexual offenders, which are rare to begin with. Otto contacted Debbie Nathan at the National Center for Reason and Justice, a nonprofit that helps people wrongly accused of crimes against children, who then reached out to Deborah Eskenazi, an LGBTQ filmmaker. Nathan told her about the San Antonio Four, and while initially skeptical, Eskenazi met with the women and soon became devoted to telling their story. By late 2012, media attention on the women, who were becoming known as the San Antonio Four, was steadily growing. In November, Anna was unexpectedly released on parole. She spoke to reporters at her childhood home, a small bungalow where the street dead ends at a muddy creek. Dogs were barking, and a few neighbors watched from a distance as she sat on the front steps and talked to a local TV anchor. He asked to film her walking around the yard, and she complied, but she wouldn't stick 1 foot past the curb for the camera to symbolize her freedom, since it would technically violate her parole conditions. She was still a convicted sex offender, and there was a long list of parole rules, okay? No cell phones, no computers, no contact with anyone under 18. Her brother managed to get her a job at his auto shop, but she had to quit when they discovered it was near a school. Things soon began falling into place for the remaining women. The same year, one of the Limon girls recanted her allegations on camera to Eskenazi, saying nothing had actually happened, that her father and grandmother had coerced her and her sister into making the accusations. Also, a new medical study had found that many forensic science methods, including the one that Dr. Kellogg had used to identify sexual assault, lacked scientific foundation. In 2013, Dr. Kellogg signed an affidavit stating that her previous testimony was factually inaccurate since science had changed. In light of the findings that many forensic science techniques were no longer reliable, a Texas bill was passed that helped people challenge convictions made on what was now known to be junk science. The Innocence Project of Texas submitted evidence, and the state agreed the women deserved new trials and released the remaining 3 in 2013. By this point, Ramirez had been in prison for nearly 17 years, and the other 2 for close to 14 years. They were all in their early 40s. In 2016, a judge overturned the women's convictions, deeming a new trial unnecessary. However, he said there wasn't enough proof to declare them